What we're here today is to talk about a genre. I'm going to talk about it. It's going to be a very relaxed discussion. And then, of course, that's going to eventually or at some point fade into a review. That's going to be a separate video, even though I'm going to record them at the same time. The review I'm going to do is for China Millville's Perdido Street Station. But before I review it, I've been throwing the term around for a while, and I want to talk about the genre a little bit. Obviously, I'm not an expert, but the genre I want to talk about is the new weird. Okay? This was a genre whose sort of origin is in the mid 90s esque, somewhere in there, and it sort of faded out and sort of dispersed into other things. Probably somewhere around, I don't know, somewhere after 2010, somewhere after that. This particular book by Vandermeer came out in 2008. Where he gives us a good what he calls working definition of the new weird, because it's kind of hard to define, and which is why I want to make this, because I've thrown that term around for sure, and not really give it any context, right? And it's also not a term that you really hear much anymore. So I thought maybe it was worth it to sort of spend a couple minutes talking about it, and I think it's and it's pertinent to what I think Perdido Street Station is trying to do, and other new weird books do, a genre that I really like. But the genre itself did sort of, like I said, dispersed. It still exists. All those writers are still writing things. The most probably famous or noteworthy or notable person who has written new weird is Jeff Vandermeer. China Millville is the other shining star from that movement, although I think that Melville maybe has moved away from that term, and his idea of what the new weird could or was is different. That's a whole thing. It's a whole thing. Let's just go into the new weird. So the new weird, like I said, started somewhere in the mid-ish 90s. It's no definite starting point per se. And then at some point in the after 2010, the term sort of fell out of use. People were still writing things that would be considered new weird. And of course, the writers who wrote in that genre, some of them I don't think really write very much anymore. And some of them have gone on to write maybe just weird sci-fi. What Vandermeer writes is really not new weird anymore. So, but I guess it's important to understand the genre when I talk about a review for Perdido Street Station, because this book is essentially the book that if you look up new weird genre, this is the book you're going to see. Probably you're almost certainly going to see this book. You might also see a couple of Vandermeer's books, and there's a handful of other books like KJ Bishop, is it Bishop? Oh, yes, Bishop's The Etched City, which I want to review also. It's a genre I really love. So, okay. Like I said, it's a little bit, I say relaxed, but it's also a little chaotic, a little hectic, but I enjoy making something like this. It's very spur of the moment that I don't prepare for. I kind of like doing that. It's fun. I kind of have to throw myself into the moment and sort of come up with what I want to say and make sure I cover all the bases. Notes would be good, but I do enjoy this sort of throwing myself into the fire, I guess it is. So, here we are, a definition as written by Jeff Vandermeer in his short story collection, The New Weird, published in 2008. These glasses have a fingerprint on them, and that makes it really hard to read through them. So, yes, we're going to sit here. How you doing? I'm doing okay. How about you? Yeah, I'm going to take a little drink of coffee. This is not me trying to steal Mike's Books Reviews IP or anything. Isn't this something he always does? I don't know if it's I don't watch enough of his stuff to know. He has great reviews. And I don't watch very many of them. And the reason I don't is because he covers stuff that I like to talk about or I want to talk about, and I'm worried about, pardon the term, regurgitating his opinions and thoughts, and I don't want to do that. I feel it would be very disingenuous to him and to you, whoever you are. So I don't want to do that, but I do like his stuff, right? Neither here nor there. Here we are. Now we have clean glasses. Let's read from Jeff Vandermeer's The New Weird, what he defines as a working definition of the new weird. Now, But actually, I wanted to say something before that. The term "new weird" was not invented by Jeff Vandermeer. It came from M. John Harrison. M. John Harrison is a writer that actually is much earlier, from wrote in like the 70s, and I don't know exactly when he got to start, but I know he wrote in the 70s. I did a recent review of one of his books, The Pastel City, which is part of the Viraconium series. I would say it's sort of like proto New Weird. It's sort of like it's one of those, I guess you could say, like, if you could think about it like this, it's sort of like a foundational text for the New Weird movement that would come 20 something years later. Now, the term, as sort of created or used first by M. John Harrison, was in some sort of a forum or something. And he's sort of talking to other writers at the time, around 2002, about this sort of emerging genre and like what it was. And there was a whole big discussion about that. I can see if I can find, I think there's a link to that discussion, right, where some larger names, right, names that we know, like Vandermeer, and I think and other, maybe, at least other writers of the New Weird movement, all are in this format and talking and everything. So it might be worth your time. Apparently, it's very long. I've not really read it, but I can try and find that and put that in the link. I hate when I give myself homework on a video, because then later I'm like, what did I say? Anyhow. But what I wanted to say about all that, see, this is why somebody has to rein me in. What I wanted to say is that the term New Weird is not maybe what you think it is. Okay, so it's actually two genres that sort of have been portmanteaued into New Weird. You have obviously the weird genre that is probably best represented by like Lovecraft and Clark Ashton Smith, right? I guess Robert E. Howard too, although I feel like Robert E. Howard is much more seated, much more securely in the sword and sorcery type genre than the other two writers. But I also feel that Robert E. Howard is a significant contributor, and there's lots of other ones too. Lots of fantastic fiction. I love the weird fiction of like the early 1900s, like 1910ish, or even a little earlier, right? Probably going back to like somebody like Blackwood, like Algernon Blackwood, and then going all the way up to like Lovecraft and Smith. And I don't really know when that movement sort of ended. Somewhat deriving its name from Weird Tales magazine, but essentially it's fiction that tries to be different and strange, and takes stuff from horror and fantasy and sci-fi, and usually like mixing science fiction and horror a little bit, right? It's a really great example of what Weird was trying to do. Okay, so there's that. Then there's the new part of that term, New Weird, and that comes from New Wave, referring to the science fiction movement of the 70s or so, where there was a movement away from the physical sciences in science fiction and into more cerebral, like, I guess you could say, like psychology and stuff like that. That's not a great example, but that's sort of where the new term gets its, the New Weird, the new part sort of borrows from, right? And New Weird in general, if you want a real simple definition or a simple idea, is it's very similar to a genre called slipstream, which I'm going to say that I've heard before and really had no idea what it was, and I had to look it up. It's okay. I don't know it all, all right? And I will never claim that I know it all. I had to look up what exactly is slipstream, and it's related to New Wave. It's essentially the way the simple way to define slipstream is like genre fiction that is like really close, or like could almost be just literary fiction, right? So I don't have really a great example of a slipstream novel, because it seems like once it like totally crosses over into mainstream fiction, it's not really slipstream anymore. At least it seems like it. So like Slaughterhouse-Five, or like something by Vonnegut, right? Like Cat's Cradle or something. Like that stuff is, I don't really think is considered slipstream. So it's like, okay, not quite it. But it's like essentially like genre fiction, usually science fiction, but not exclusively, I don't think, that tries very hard to be, or it's very close to just like literary fiction. Okay, right? So that's kind of what New Weird is doing. Kind of. Except that instead of science fiction, like which is what slipstream and new wave or genres. They're more in science fiction. New weird tends to be, but not exclusively, more fantasy based, right? So it's more fantasy, but it takes heavily from horror and science fiction, and those inform its storytelling and its ideas, right? And which is kind of awesome. Let's see. Now, after the long wait, how are we at here? I'm going to try not to edit this too. I'm sure everyone's going to love that. Here we are. If you can't laugh at yourself, then can you really laugh at anything? No, you can't. That's words of wisdom. Here we are. Vandermeer's definition of the new weird. New weird is a type of urban, secondary world fiction that subverts the romanticized ideas about place found in traditional fantasy, largely by choosing realistic, complex, real-world models as the jumping-off point for creation of setting that may combine elements of both science fiction and fantasy. Now, that's the first sentence of that, and I want to unpack that a little bit. But I've talked a lot, and normally I would edit out stuff like this. I'm not going to, because I'm lazy. I want to be lazy. Let me be lazy, please. I want to be lazy. I'm a very lazy person. If you did, never mind. So, new weird is a type of urban. Urban is important. It's not. So we're not talking about like just in the city per se, but there's a sort of like street level sort of aspect to new weird fantasy. It's sort of a fantasy genre, although it's not necessarily fantasy. It's a very fantasy. What fantasy is really stretched a lot by new weird stuff. But usually urban. It's an important. I don't know that it's exclusive. I don't know that if I can't specifically name a new weird story that does not have an urban element to it, but that's an important distinction. Secondary world, and that is kind of important for that it has to be secondary world. And what we mean by secondary world is that, for example, Perdido Street Station does not take place in a world that you and I live in or could ever really live in, right? It's not a future version of ourselves. This is not like the Dying Earth or the Book of the New Sun, where we are so distant into the future that that the things that these people are interacting with might be technologies just so far advanced that we can't recognize it. It's not really that. This is just not our universe, right? Or not our dimension or whatever, right? Magic works, right? So I think that's why it tends to be more fantasy, because it's secondary world. Something about it has changed, right? There's no recognizable geography in Perdido Street Station. Okay, we don't see bits of Europe or bits of America or South America or anything like that. And then it subverts romanticized ideas, and I think it's very important to know going into this, okay? Because it could seem that new weird stuff is a little bit of a bummer sometimes. Okay, but I think what it's trying to do, and what I think it really is answering, is the sort of pervasive fiction that we were seeing in the late 80s and early 90s, and even up into the 90s and early 2000s, which is just sort of like all this fantasy that was the same. It was like the same tropes over and over again. I know I've said before that's maybe the only kind of fiction that I'm not really a big fan of, is that just fantasy that I feel like I've read before. Because I read a lot of that when I was younger. And it got to the point, I would go to the bookstore or something like that, and it was like everything was like, it's like Lord of the Rings, or it's like Tolkien. Everything was like that. It was like just everywhere. And those tropes, right, that are romanticized in fantasy, and then it's not to dog any of those writers that write that fantasy, right? It's not to say that they write badly. It's only to say that that genre was just saturated with that. I mean, it was oversaturated, right? There's just too much of it, right? And so the new weird sort of took those elements that were traditionally in that fantasy very romanticized, very lovingly painted, and they sort of flipped it, right? So a really great example, and we'll get to this in the review for it, Perdido Street Station takes place in the city of New Crobuzon. And the first description that we get of New Crobuzon is of an outsider coming into it for the first time, and he describes the city as being like a corpse that is crawling with maggots. It's a pretty de-romanticized version of a exotic fantasy city, because it's a super exotic city, right? There are all varieties of strange fantasy races or species, I think is now what we say, in that city, right? There's cactus people and bird people and like watercrafters and all kinds of weird stuff, right? Tons of weird stuff. But it's like, it's ugly and it's dirty, the way it really kind of would be if we think about it. So I think that that de-romanticize element is important to understand going in, and that it doesn't mean that you're bummed the whole time that you're reading it, but you can see that there's not necessarily a happy-go-lucky or sort of charming element to the environment that the characters are basically take place in, that they live in. Let's continue with Vandermeer's discussion. New Weird has a visceral, in-the-moment quality that often uses elements of surreal or transgressive horror for its tone, style, and effects, in combination with the stimulus of influence from new wave writers or their proxies, including also such forebears as Myron Peake and the French-English decadents. Now, I don't know much about the French-English decadents that are used, but I do want to say a couple things about that. So I was both surprised and pleased to see that something I just didn't realize was that Clive Barker's horror, which is transgressive horror, is sort of also seen as being like an inspiration. His Books of Blood is sort of an inspiration for the way that horror is handled in New Weird, which is that much like Chris talked about a few times in videos where he talks about Lovecraft and that sort of weird horror that Lovecraft wrote, that in the final moments, right, that we look away, that the camera turns away, much like in like older movies, where something horrible would happen and the camera would turn away and you see like the shadows on the wall. That sort of technique, which can be very effective and that Lovecraft uses very well, but he also uses it a lot, which is why I think it's sort of, after a time, it becomes maybe slightly frustrating. But Barker's horror tends to sort of start with showing it to you and then going from there. Okay, so that's sort of what is meant by that sort of, and that's again subverting your expectations. So New Weird has a lot of interest in subverting your expectations of tropes. What was the thing? Oh, and Myron Peake. Myron Peake, of course, wrote Gormenghast, something I've read some of the very first book and really liked, but never got back to. I can't talk a whole lot about Gormenghast because most of what I know is sort of like secondhand or hearsay, I guess you could say, right? I only know about it. I haven't really read enough of it to really say much of it, other than it's very heavily focused on character and character interaction and character dialogue and portrayal of those characters. And it was very fun. The only reason I didn't finish it was because I could tell at the time I just wasn't, it wasn't what I wanted to read, and I didn't want to not give that book my best foot forward, right? I didn't want to start it and not really be into it at the moment, and then like sort of have the book suffer for that. So I didn't want that. So there's that. Hoping to read it this year, but I did recently, in like just sort of to remember this Myron Peake story that I had read that was very short. I read that recently, reread it, and really liked it. Liked what it did, and it comes from, and stop me if you've heard this before, from the Oxford Book of Fantasy Stories. Really fantastic collection. It's out of print. If you can find it, it's worth it. An excellent primer for fantasy. But it's Myron Peake's story in here called Same Time, Same Place. Is it New Weird? No. Is it interesting? Yes. It's about a young man who is angry with his parents, and he leaves, and he goes to this like cafe or something and meets this woman, and they start talking, and he just like completely falls for her. So they go, and every day for like 8 days he comes back And they always, at the very end, they say, same time, same place. We'll meet at the same time, same place, right? But she, she never leaves she always waits. She's always there when he gets there, and she never leaves, right, before him. He always has to leave first, and he's gone before she'll leave. And so finally, frustrated with his parents, he decides he wants to go, and they agree that they're going to get married. He actually steals his mother's ring and gives it to her, and they're going to be married. I will say that story has a shocking ending. It was really a great story. Very short, too, if you can find it. Myron Peaks, same time, same place. Great stuff. And so that initially, that reading made me very interested in Myron Peak, and absolutely worth your time. That's a slight segue. It is. I just have to admit it is. New weird fictions are acutely aware of the modern world, even if in disguise, and not always overtly political. As part of this awareness of the modern world, New Weird relies on its visionary power of a surrender to the weird that isn't, for example, hermetically sealed in a haunted house or on the moors, or in a cave, a haunted house on the moors, or in a cave in Antarctica. So what we're saying here is that you just have to accept that things are weird, right? And sometimes the weirdness of them is not explicitly symbolism per se, right? And I think that's where you would get, like with literary fiction, something is weird and it's weird for a reason, right? The artist, the writer is saying something because it's weird, and they're not necessarily saying anything. Here, we're developing a mood, and part of that mood is this strangeness, this sort of like being slightly off balance, right? Simulating, in a sense, what it might be like in the example I gave earlier, where someone comes into the city of New Chromosome and they see this city that is disgusting to them, right? They think it's filthy. Simulating what it might feel like for us to enter this world where we feel off balance, right? And so falling into these tropes makes you feel at home. But that's not what we're trying to do in New Weird. We're not trying to make you feel at home. We're trying to get you off balance and make you look at things differently or strangely. That's at least part of the goal, right? That's part of what Weird does. And that can be a really great experience as long as you know going into it, right? Though New Weird should clue you in that it's going to be weird. And it's not hermetically sealed. That, and what we're talking about there is a good reason why, for example, Vandermeer's book Annihilation and the series that's part of is not really New Weird, because quite literally the weirdness of that book is to some degree hermetically sealed, right? It doesn't infect the entirety of everything, right? It is not taken. Well, I've not read everything. In fact, I've only seen the movie. Yes, I know the movie and the book are not the same thing. Do intend to read it. From what I know, and I don't think I'm wrong here, that the strangeness that is presented in that novel is somewhat sealed up. It's in a place, right? It is not everywhere. So it can't just be a haunted castle where things get crazy, right? Like, whoa, weird haunted castle and all kinds of crazy stuff happens, right? Like that, like the movie House. It was a fantastic Japanese horror movie, by the way. Just crazy. I just watched that recently for the first time and was like, my goodness, this movie is phenomenal. I loved it. It was crazy, and I loved that it was so crazy. Lots and lots, by the way, if you're not sure, lots and lots of cuts away from what's happening with the actors to a cat meowing. It was just like, I was like, I don't know why. Anyways, great stuff. Go find that movie. It's phenomenal. Just phenomenal. Anyhow, so not hermetically sealed, right? It's like the whole thing. The surrender or belief of the writer can take many forms. Some of them even involving the use of postmodern techniques that do not undermine the surface reality of the text. So this definition, he goes on to say, this definition presents two significant ways in which the New Weird can be distinguished from slipstream or interstitial fiction. First, while slipstream and interstitial fiction often claim new wave influence, they rarely, if ever, cite horror influence, with its particular emphasis on the intense use of grotesquerie focused around transformation, decay, or mutilation of the human body. Second, postmodern techniques that undermine the surface reality of the text, point out its artificiality, are not part of new weird aesthetic, but they are part of the slipstream and its interstitial toolbox. So I can't give specific examples about the artificiality of the text. Essentially, it's saying, like, I guess it wouldn't break the fourth wall. Like new weird, like I guess that's what we're talking about there. You know, I think that's. I don't think I'm getting it too wrong by saying that it's saying that new weird doesn't really focus on trying to break the fourth wall, but that slipstream and interstitial fiction would. And I don't know if I think I overemphasized the word interstitial. Isn't that fun? It was fun. So yeah, there we get a little more talk about the horror influence that new weird has that the other two genres do not. New weird, absolutely fantastic stuff out there. Perdido Street Station, like I said, is probably the most noteworthy or notable one. Jeff Vandermeer's Ambergris series, The City of Saints and Madmen, is one of those. That's new weird. KJ Bishop's The Etched City, I know, is part of that, is considered to be part of it. There's some other ones, and I'm sorry that I'm only mentioning these three, just what comes to mind. And Gormenghast, while it is not, just like Vericonium is not, are sort of like inform the genre, right? Gormenghast is often used as like required reading or for someone who's going to be doing new weird, or it's sort of like expected that you at least know about it and what it does for whatever reason. So that's one of the reasons why I've wanted to get it to read it for a long time. And I actually recently bought a nicer hardback edition than the old paperback edition I've got. So now I have an extra copy. I don't know what I'm going to do with it. Something. So that's cool. So I'm excited to read that this year. Perdido Street Station review coming up very shortly on the heels of this. In fact, I'm going to record it right now. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Virgil, and this is Literally Books. Thank you, by the way, because I know I went all over the place, but it's fun to go all over the place sometimes, right? Yeah, it is. I like doing it. If you like it, liking and subscribing helps me to do more of things that I like. And hopefully you get some entertainment out of this, and maybe even a slight amount of education. That's it. That's all I have. That's it. Thanks very much. Bye.